Core Design, a British game developer, homegrown in the land of Britannia. And, for a time, they were one of the big players in the late 90s due to one of the most famous game series and characters ever made, and one of my personal favorites as well. Core Design became a favorite in the British gaming scene, but as quickly as they rose to acclaim, they fell from grace. And all it took was a single bad game. A really bad game. A really horrifically terrible, just offensively bad game that I'm still mad about personally to this day and never will not be. This is a grudge, Core. A grudge that I hold, because how dare you do that to me. But before we get to that, we have to talk about their history. Their British history. Core Design was founded in Derby in May of 1988. Their original founding members consisted of Chris Shrigley, Andy Green, Rob Toone, Terry Lloyd, Simon Phipps, Dave Pridmore, Jeremy Hethsmith, Kevin Norburn, and Greg Holmes. The vast majority of their development roster were actually former employees of Gremlin Graphics. Gremlin was another British software house that was based in Sheffield, and had worked mostly in the home computer market, which is exactly what Core proceeded to be as well. And that makes sense because, well, frankly, it was because they were British. As I've mentioned before, Britain actually didn't really get down with consoles nearly as much as other places. It wasn't until the 90s that started happening. Instead, they preferred to play their games on home computers, and they had plenty of options. ZX Spectrum, Amiga, Atari ST, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, and a bunch of others. As a result, British game developers tended to make their games for home computers rather than consoles, since, well, that's where they played their games. They played their games on the computers, so that's what they focused on. And pretty quick, it was revealed that Core was no joke. These guys knew what they were doing, and knew how to make a fun game. The first game they ever made was called Action Fighter in 1988, same year they were founded. And by made, I mean they didn't make it, it was a Sega game, but they did do the ports. And it was considered pretty good at the time. But in 1989, they started making their own stuff. They did Dynamite Ducks, which was also a Sega game, but they did Rick Dangerous, as well as Saint and Grievesy and Switchblade. Rick Dangerous was probably the standout title among that lot. While reviews were a little bit mixed, some really liked it, and it was heavily inspired by the Indiana Jones series. And the cover of the game, yeah, looks like a poor man's version of Indiana Jones, but that is foreshadowing, if ever there was some. While Rick himself would not be the landmark title that Core would wind up making, basing their games off of Indiana Jones is something they would try again, and to much better effect the second time around. But that's still a few years off. In 1990, they made Torvok the Warrior, Corporation, Monty Python's Flying Circus, the computer game, Axel's Magic Hammer, Skids, Impossible, Rick Dangerous 2, yep, Rick did get at least one sequel, and the sequel was considered much better than the original, so hey, they were learning. And also Carve Up, a clever title actually. Very simple, but very fun game too. In 1991, they gave us Warzone, Chuck Rock, Heimdall, and Frenetic. And they were starting to make a lot more games for home consoles, as the industry shifted over to that. Technically, the first game they made for a home console was Corporation. There was a Sega Genesis version of that, and Impossible also had a version of the TurboGrafx 16, which is a very obscure competitor in the console market back then, but a pretty decent platform if you had one. Chuck Rock also got ported to a lot more home consoles. There was a version of the Sega CD, the Game Gear, the Genesis, the SNES, and the Master System. In 1992, they released Doodlebug, Chuck Rock 2, Son of Chuck, which I actually played as a kid. I really liked Chuck Rock 2. Hard as heck, but I really enjoyed it. I played the Genesis version, as you can imagine being an American, and yes, it was ported to many home consoles, though there was an Amiga version as well. Curse of Enchantia, Hook, Probably one of their poorer games, but it was a licensed game, so what do you expect? Premiere, The Adventurers, Thunderhawk, Wolfschild, Jaguar XJ220, which I have historically mispronounced. Everyone's gonna yell at me with Jaguar pronunciation. I've never said Jaguar any other way. You know, I don't even care. You guys know we're talking about the blasted British cars. Or are we? Maybe we're talking about a wire named Jag. Maybe that's what's happening. You don't know. It's a mystery. Also, that game was apparently really, really good. And also in 1992, there was Wonder Dog. In 93, we got Asterix The Great Rescue, Encore, Blastar, Blob, Cyberpunks, Darkmere. In 1994, there was Corkers, BC Racers, Heimdall 2, Universe, Banshee, Dragonstone, Battlecore, Soulstar, and Bubba and Styx. In 1995, they gave us Skeleton Crew, Asterix and the Power of Gods! Yeah! The Big Red Adventure, the Scottish Open Virtual Golf, and Firestorm Thunderhawk 2. Now, 96 is where things get really interesting. Well, technically it would have been a bit before that, but that's when they released the game series in question, and things started off for them. The concept for this particular game dated back to 1994, and it was created by Toby Gard. Gard proposed a concept to the company's head, Jeremy Heath Smith, during a brainstorming session that year, because they were looking for new game concepts, focusing on the upcoming PlayStation console. The platform promised a lot more capabilities, particularly 3D, something Core was definitely interested in getting into. The concept by Gard was basically a three-dimensional exploration adventure game, featuring a male protagonist that was heavily inspired by Indiana Jones. Pre-production lasted for 6 months, and Gard worked with Paul Douglas on it. The male lead originally strongly resembled Indiana Jones. Heath Smith asked for that to change, because they didn't want to get sued. So Gard switched up the male lead, and in the early days he also wanted to give the player the option between two different leads, one male and one female. But this project was given a fairly modest budget, and most of the scope was kept pretty modest as well. And he realized that developing two leads might have been cool, but also would have required creating and animating two playable characters. And that was going to be a bit of a pain, a bit of a stretch for what they were working with, and he preferred the female character far more than the male. So he decided to just shrink it down to just a female lead. During this time, Core would be acquired by a company called Center Gold in December of 94. But before this game was released, they were acquired again in April of 1996 by Eidos Interactive. Eidos was heavily interested in what Core was working on in this particular game, and actually pushed to bring back the selectable male lead, as they didn't think a female-led game would do particularly well, because, you know, girls don't play video games. That's silly. Also, boys don't like playing as girls, especially attractive girls, because that would be silly. Why would a boy want to look at an attractive female? That would be ridiculous! That's absurd! But that failed. They stood on business when it came to this particular choice, and originally her name was Laura Cruz. But Eidos again interfered with that, saying the name would be alien to Americans, and and whatever. So they changed it again to Lara Croft. Interestingly, speaking as an American, I've known more Lauras than Laras in my life, so I don't think Eidos knew what they were talking about, but it's whatever. It was a minor thing. The game's plot went through several revisions before being, well, finalized, and Lara was, well, an archaeologist, but an Indiana Jones-style archaeologist, not, just dusting off old party archaeology. No! Guns! Blasting! Adventure! Jumping through traps! It was gonna get crazy around here! And indeed, it did! The game would be known as Tomb Raider, releasing in 1996, alongside two other games, Shell Shock and Blam Machine Head. We don't have to talk about them, because Tomb Raider was the standout hit, because holy heck, this was way more of a success than I think even Core thought. It offered a fully 3D world to adventure in, but it's what I like to refer to as a precise platformer. It's not a very fast game, it wasn't meant to be. Basically, it's all about exploring and looking around, timing your jumps very perfectly, as well as shooting enemies on occasion, and solving puzzles. You really feel like you're actually exploring an abandoned tomb, and doing it very carefully because, well, there are ancient traps that could kill you at any waking moment. Lara was an instant favorite. People loved her. And Core proved that you could, in fact, put a female lead in place in a video game and have it be tremendously successful. Lara broke the mold, and I'm sure some are going to bring up, what about Samus? Yeah, Samus did that too, but remember, no one knew Samus was a woman when they first played as her. Lara... Oh, listen, everyone knew this was a woman, okay? I don't think there was ever a question. Tomb Raider became an international success, garnering worldwide attention and becoming one of the best-selling PlayStation games. It wasn't a PlayStation exclusive, as there was a PC version as well as one for the Sega Saturn, but most people probably played it on the PlayStation, as I did, I must admit. Core was thrilled with it because, well, I mean, people loved their character, and they were netting a ton of money, but also Eidos was definitely thrilled with this, because prior to their acquisition of Core, they'd actually recorded a $2.5 million pre-tax loss the previous year. But the success of this game turned that loss into a $14.5 million profit. So Eidos was like, yes! Yes! We did something right! We bought Core, and that was a good friggin' idea! And from here on, most of what Core would focus on would be more Tomb Raider games, because people wanted more. People were like, you gotta make more of these. Okay, this is great. This is phenomenal. And they did. Though they did produce a few other games, most of what they would do from here on will be Tomb Raider. Following year, they released Swagman and Fighting Force. Swagman was kind of an okay game, and Fighting Force reviewed pretty poorly, but these days has actually developed kind of a cult following for being a fair attempt to try to make a beat-em-up in a 3D environment, which at the time was a tall order. It was actually pitched originally as a fourth entry in Sega's Streets of Rage series, but Sega said no. However, 97 was also the year we got Tomb Raider 2. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what we're waiting for. Forget Swagman, forget Fighting Force, we got more Lara! And Tomb Raider 2 was great. It was one of the most anticipated games, and they completed it within 6 to 8 months, which sounds like a really bad thing to do, and it was, but not because they couldn't do it, but because it was emotionally taxing on the entire team. They were so stressed. Toby Gard and Paul Douglas would in fact leave over creative differences that Eidos was trying to put in. But in the end, the game sold exceedingly well. As of 2009, it had sold 6.8 million copies worldwide, and was the second best-selling PlayStation title in the UK in general. It's often considered the best of all the Core design Tomb Raider games. I don't agree with that assessment, but I do think it is one of the best. I completely understand why people say that, because it is a great game, absolutely. It's just not my personal favorite. And the following year, we got Ninja Shadow of Darkness. Which didn't review well at all. And Tomb Raider 3. Oh yeah. This was probably the first questionable Tomb Raider game, though. 98 was not a good year for anybody who liked core design. I'll be honest, it reviewed a bit worse than Tomb Raider 2, and it didn't sell as well as the previous games either. The reason for this was a few things, but I think mostly it was down to the fact that Tomb Raider always had tanky controls, and that wasn't unusual back in the day, because we were still getting used to 3D and how best to control a character in a three-dimensional environment. Tomb Raider, by this point, people were expecting some kind of evolution in this regard, and no, the controls were still basically the same. Granted, if you didn't mind that, it was fine, but, you know, that was still an issue. It probably didn't help that Tomb Raider 3, even in other aspects, really wasn't much of an improvement over Tomb Raider 2. Whereas there's a pretty clear difference between Tomb Raider 1 and Tomb Raider 2, the jump between Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 3 feels very short. It almost feels like more of a DLC add-on to 2. I mean, it's certainly long enough to be its own game, but in terms of the gameplay, it's nearly identical, except that it's arguably more difficult because level design is friggin' awful in Tomb Raider 3, and I hate it. It's my least favorite of the core design games, with the exception of one, but of the ones in the original PlayStation, 3 is often considered the worst choice. It's still not bad. I wouldn't say it's not worth playing, but it was definitely the first misstep in the series, but not a major one, not enough to kill the whole thing. And the following year, once again, we got Fighting Force 2. Yeah, Fighting Force got a sequel. Yeah, interesting. But we also got Tomb Raider, The Last Revelation. Oh, they're getting serious now. They dropped the numbers. Now it's just The Last Revelation. And I love this game. This is my favorite of the core design games by far. And, yeah, it's great. It's a phenomenal experience. Definitely a big step up from Tomb Raider 3, with solid level design and really fun mechanics. It's still got the tank controls, so that is still a problem, but this is my favorite. But by this time, you may be noticing they've been making a Tomb Raider game every single year since the first game came out, and yeah, that was mandated by Eidos. They wanted more Lara because she was making them so much money, and that's fair. Also, Core was exhausted for two reasons. One, they were just working a lot, just too much, trying to get these games done within a year, and to the quality they wanted to be out of the series, because they had created Lara and they loved her. But also, they were getting tired of working on Tomb Raider. They wanted to do something else. And they were kind of doing that, but, I mean, they're releasing less games in general. It's pretty clear that most of their manpower was going straight into Tomb Raider. They were so gung-ho about this that, spoiler warning, just to be clear, it's an older game, so I'm not really too upset. And it doesn't really matter because they made sure that this didn't happen eventually. But Lara is believed to have died at the end. And that was intentional by Core, not because it was necessarily a great decision in terms of writing. I mean, it was an interesting and bittersweet ending, because you're successful, but Lara still dies. Or, well, presumably dies. But also, they wanted out of this arrangement. They wanted to be able to make other games. So they thought if they closed the series and killed off the main character, Eidos would let them off the hook, and they'd be able to work on other things. They got away with this because Eidos, while they were mandating more Tomb Raider, was giving Core a lot more creative freedom when it came to this title. They allowed them to stretch their wings and actually develop something on their own. And that meant they could get away with this, and they didn't actually tell them that they were doing this until it was way too late to change it. The game was great. It was. They did a phenomenal job, especially given the time frame they had. But the ending wasn't received particularly well by fans because no one really wanted Lara to die. They wanted more Tomb Raider. And Eidos was pretty upset too because that was their cash cow. And do you honestly think that they were going to let you stop making Tomb Raider games when they're selling so well? You fools. They own you. I don't care how you ended it. Fix it. Comic book logic. Whatever. Make it happen. More Tomb Raider. And that's exactly what happened. They forced them to continue making more Tomb Raider. And in the year 2000, we got 2 Tomb Raider games. Yeah. One was just called Tomb Raider, though, and it wasn't a remake of the original. This was a Tomb Raider game for the Game Boy Color. Yeah, really. It was a side-scroller, but with similar mechanics to the 3D Tomb Raider games, making it a very unique experience. It's not bad for what it is, but you have to know what you're getting into. How the big one was Tomb Raider Chronicles. This was the one for the main platforms, and how the heck were they going to get around the whole Lara death thing? Well, in Chronicles' case, what they did was they basically made it a collection of different smaller stories that had happened over her career that hadn't been in the other games. And that made for a really unique experience. But Chronicles wound up in a similar case of Tomb Raider 3, where there weren't really any new mechanics, very few anyway, compared to Tomb Raider The Last Revelation. And people were getting really tired of the tank controls by this point, and wanted the series to progress, whereas Chronicles didn't really progress it at all. It was basically a stopgap. Personally, I'm pretty soft on it because I don't really mind it at all. It's actually a pretty fun game, especially if you wanted more after The Last Revelation, because it plays just like it. If you like The Last Revelation, you'll probably like Chronicles, especially given one of the complaints with Last Revelation was that they set the entire game in Egypt. Now, that's a great place for a game called Tomb Raider, but the other games had always been a worldwide kind of adventure, going to different environments, whereas Last Revelation was just sand, desert, Egyptians. Okay, that's what we're working with. But Chronicles does the worldwide thing again, but with Last Revelation mechanics, so hey, in that way, you might actually enjoy it. I definitely recommend giving it a shot if you haven't, as it is a bit overlooked. However, Core Design had split into two teams when it came to making the next Tomb Raider games. One of them was responsible for Chronicles, while the other team was looking at the next big step, which was going to be a next-generation Tomb Raider game for PS2, as well as PC. But before we get to that, they did release some other games to fill the void. They released a sequel to the Game Boy Color game called Tomb Raider: The Curse of the Sword in 2001. That same year, they also released Project Eden and Thunderhawk Operation Phoenix. Thunderhawk Operation Phoenix, by the way, is one of my most hated games in history. I can't stand that game. It was called Thunderstrike Operation Phoenix in North America, and shouldn't be confused with EA's Strike series, which also featured helicopters. Not even remotely the same. Operation Phoenix is not a good game, and it should be better, because I remember at the time thinking that the game looked great on PS2, as well as controlling great. The helicopter controls in that game I thought were phenomenal. I had so much fun with it, it had so many cool mechanics, but Core screwed it up by making it completely impossible. The game is too friggin' hard. Way too hard. And you might be saying, well, have you considered getting better at the game? Yeah, that's adorable. I tried, alright? It's not really my fault, because the way they handled it is that there's a life system. Now, you may be saying, oh, that's normal for games. Okay, you don't understand. First, one thing, this is PS2 era, and we have saves. And yeah, the game does allow you to save, but it always saves with the amount of lives you have. That's the amount of chances you have, period. And when you run out of lives, it's game over. It doesn't matter whether you saved or not. Now, you can reload your save, but you still have the same amount of lives you had before. Do you see the problem here? It makes for a tedious, tiring experience. It's just so difficult, so brutally difficult. And it ruins what could have been a really, really fun game. Just Operation Phoenix, sorry, I get PTSD from that one. In 2002, they released Hurdy-Gurdy, a fairly average game, as well as Tomb Raider: The Prophecy for the Game Boy Advance. The Prophecy's bad. I hate that game. That game's not very good. Probably the first truly bad Tomb Raider game released. I mean, Tomb Raider 3 and Chronicles have their haters, but Prophecy is legitimately not a good game, in my opinion. However, it's 2003 that things get completely screwed up. Because as I mentioned, they've been working on the big next-generation Tomb Raider game for PS2. They'd already released a few PS2 games, but none of them did particularly well or were particularly good, probably because they didn't have enough time to devote to them. But in this Tomb Raider game's case, they did have 3 years to work on it. They took their time, originally just calling it Tomb Raider Next Generation. They conducted market research to decide on a new setting and story for Lara, and the market research told them that everyone was into dark, edgy, goth, emo, brooding. Yes, early 2000s. I get it. Also, no, you fools! You can't do this to us. That's not how Lara's supposed to be. But that's what they were going for. But they wound up wasting a whole year because Richard Morton came over from the Chronicles team to find that, as he put it, they went off the rails. Basically, they were making a pretty incredible game, but not actually considering what the PS2 was likely capable of handling. What they were making was not going to be functional on the PS2. They were just like, oh, we could do this, we could do that. And it's like, that's really cool. Also, the PS2 will explode if you make it do that. So they describe everything they'd worked on for a year, losing significant time. And there really wasn't a clear team leader when it came to developing the game. Didn't help that the PS2 was notoriously obnoxious when it came to developing on it, and Core didn't have a lot of experience with it because it was a new console. They added a lot of new mechanics and changed the controls, and again, there was that dark, edgy tone. And you'd think, going around calling myself Darkness, that I'd be down for that. I wasn't, not in this case, because it was a really bad idea. It just didn't feel like Tomb Raider anymore. But if it was just that, it probably would have been fine as long as the game was fun. It wasn't. It wasn't at all. It was actually abysmal. Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness. Yes, that's what they actually called it, much to my chagrin. It is arguably the worst Tomb Raider game ever made. And I mean that. It was so bad. So hideously terrible. The updated controls were worse than they had been in the original PlayStation games. The plot left a lot to be desired. Lara's attitude during it, while meant to be darker and edgier, generally made her come off as just a terrible person, and that was never what Lara was about, at all. They added some weird stealth mechanics that are clunky and don't even get used that often. Combat was dull and uninspired. And there was this weird mechanic where Lara has to get stronger by doing things before she does other things. She can move a crate or something, and she says, "I feel stronger now." And then she could do something else. And it basically boiled down to, we have to make sure the player does this thing before they do the other thing. And it's annoying. It's not fun. And none of it was fun. The whole thing was terrible. Horrible. Reviewed terribly, and is considered just abysmal. It disappointed me, it disappointed everybody, and it wound up absolutely murdering Core. The game was so lambasted and so poorly received that Eidos straight up pulled the Tomb Raider franchise away from them. Yeah, Eidos took Tomb Raider away from Core. Now, given the story so far, you may be saying, was this really Core's fault? Because Eidos had worked them to the bone making Tomb Raider games. It was only inevitable that they'd screw up eventually. That's one part of the argument, but they did have 3 years for this one, and they wasted one of those years. I mean, they had creative freedom. It was on them at the end of the day. Core's management team was furious that Eidos had simply ripped away something that they had made from them. They were contractually allowed to do that, but it was still one of those things where it's like, yo, that's not cool. Jeremy Heath Smith, along with his brother Adrian, left the company and established a new studio called Circle. They also wound up taking many of Core Design's team with them, leaving the original Core an empty shell. During the remainder of their existence, they would only release 2 more games, Smart Bomb and Free Running, both for the PlayStation Portable. Neither game was particularly amazing, and in May of 2006, Core would be acquired by Rebellion Developments, being renamed to Rebellion Derby. They would shut down March 2010. Eidos kept Tomb Raider and most of those assets, and tasked Crystal Dynamics with making more Tomb Raider games. They gave Crystal Dynamics more time, and Crystal Dynamics wound up delivering, creating the Tomb Raider Legend trilogy, which can be considered a reboot of the old games, but great, actually. Tomb Raider Underworld, the last in that particular trilogy, is my favorite Tomb Raider game ever, and all 3 are worth playing. Crystal Dynamics still handles Tomb Raider now, for better or for worse. The modern Tomb Raider games are not really what they once were. I mean, they're good, but I have my concerns about the direction the series has been taking lately. But they have started re-releasing a lot of Core's old games in collections, remastering them, and that's been pretty cool. If you're interested in playing the old Tomb Raider games, I recommend either of the remasters. They even made some improvements to Angel of Darkness in it. It's still not a good game, but it is probably the best way to play it if you insist. But I bet you're wondering, well, what about Circle? Most of Core went there. And yeah, Circle Studio did exist for a while and released a single game. Yep. Well, okay, that's not true. I should say they released a single console game. It was called Without Warning, a 2005 third-person shooter, and it wasn't good. It was bad. Nobody liked it. And from then on, they transitioned into making DVD games. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. You remember those? DVD games are basically glorified DVD menus most of the time. Usually things like quizzes. And they released quite a number of those: 2006 FIFA World Cup Trivia Challenge, blockbusters, British hit singles and albums, Discovery Kids, Killers of the Wild. There's a whole bunch of other... none of those were particularly good because they were DVD games. And yeah, Circle liquidated in 2007, despite the fact that they had secured a 7-figure investment from the Royal Bank of Scotland just the previous year. And as for Core, now their legacy does live on. Tomb Raider's still around, and as I said, they re-released their old games. Additionally, as a way to honor them, in July of 2010, shortly after the original studio closed down, a nearby road located in Derby was named Lara Croft Way. Because while they may be gone, they're never forgotten. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.